What's up, guys? You're listening to the Airtime Misfits podcast, episode 19. I'm your host, Adam, alongside Nick.
How's it going, guys?
And today, we're going to be talking about a coaster that not a lot of people care for necessarily, but we're going to take a stand for it, at least for an episode. And that coaster model is the stand-up coaster. So stick around.
Stand-up coaster was revolutionary for its time. First being built by TOGO, the Momonga, standing in.
Say.
Yeah, that is hard to say. Apparently, Momonga means Japanese flying squirrel. But so yeah,
I didn't know that.
The Momonga Standing Loop Coaster first opened at Yomiuriland in Japan in 1979. Originally just as a stand-up coaster, and it would later be
just a sit-down coaster.
Yes, and then the stand-up coaster model became a part of it. Yes. And so they modified it that way. And that actually just closed this past year in 2021. So a real piece of history is now in the scrapyard because of that.
We didn't get to ride it.
I know. But as a result of that, the stand-up coaster really began gaining traction in the 80s. You had King Cobra open at Kings Island in 84, and then Shockwave at King's Dominion in 86.
Yeah.
And then B&M came onto the scene with Iron Wolf in 90, and the rest is essentially history. This coaster model did not last long.
No, it's definitely a kind of like a spur-of-the-moment fad coaster.
Yeah.
Yes.
Very 90s. They obviously first came around in the 80s, but the coaster, when you think of it, it really screams 90s to me. Just you can stand on this coaster, it's really
right.
Cool, it's really different, it's really wild.
Well, I think in theory it's such a cool and revolutionary idea. So I wasn't really made aware of stand-up coasters until Iron Wolf. I did ride that in probably 93, maybe 94, and the idea of it seemed like mind-boggling to me. Like, what? I'm gonna stand up on this coaster?
Yeah, right. Well, yeah. I mean, I'm a little bit younger than you, so, my first stand-up coaster was Mantis, of course.
Yes, and I've mentioned this before on the podcast, but Nick happens to be the biggest fanist of Mantis.
That's true.
And actually, we are recording this podcast episode in his basement, and I am literally surrounded by the largest collection of Mantis stuff in the whole world, I assume, because
I sure hope so.
It's like 360 degrees of Mantis.
Yeah, and it's only growing in numbers. Yeah. So I hope that no one has as much Mantis stuff as me, because there might be a cause to go see a doctor. And so,
wouldn't you want to meet that person? Though?
Oh no,
it's your arch rival.
I can hardly stand myself, so I might have a hard time with that. My arch rival.
Well, I mentioned in the intro that these stand-up coasters, I mean, seemed like a really good idea, but they turned out not being such a great coaster model just because they were not very comfortable. But you, being such a big fan of Mantis, I would assume you're somewhat a fan of stand-up coasters?
I am and I'm not. I mean, to me, I've always been a big fan of the different types of coaster experiences you can experience, whether it's an invert or
flying,
any sort of coaster where you're not just in the traditional sit-down position. So
right.
The stand-up idea in theory is really cool.
I can't wait until they invent a squatting coaster.
A squatting coaster, yes. I mean, that's a matter of time, honestly.
Yeah.
You're just in a deep squat. Oh man,
it burns your thighs.
Oh yeah. You can't sit for a week.
Yeah.
Oh man. I enjoy these, but I've never ridden a stand-up coaster, if I'm being honest, where I got off and thought, man, that was amazing, aside from Riddler's Revenge. But
yeah. My favorite stand-up coaster is the first one I've ever been on, which is Iron Wolf. I just think that layout it being the first one, it was pretty tame. Like they weren't really pushing the envelope, so it's a small hill. It's pretty slow. It only has a couple inversions, so for me that was the most comfortable ride. And I do like Georgia Scorcher, which happens to be the last B&M stand-up coaster built in America, at least. And I like that coaster for the same reasons. It's not too big. It's not too fast. It only has a few inversions. Mantis, I was never a big fan of it. I always liked the way it looked. When it opened in 1996, like I thought it was super cool. Like all the other people waiting in line for 2 hours waiting to ride it. But yeah, most of the stand-up coasters, like Green Lantern, I didn't care for. Great Adventure. I do think Riddler is a good stand-up coaster. That's at Magic Mountain. That's the tallest, fastest, longest, most looping stand-up coaster. I thought that was pretty good. But overall, I'm not a huge fan of the stand-up coaster model. And as we said, TOGO was the first one to bring the stand-up coaster into existence. And like with the flying squirrel coaster, what's it called?
Momonga Standing and Loop Coaster.
Yeah, so that one was originally built as a seated coaster, and then they later added the stand-up trains. That was kind of the story for all the first stand-up coasters. They were all coasters that were already built, designed to be sit-down coasters, but then stand-up trains were added.
Yes.
I have been on a TOGO coaster.
Yeah.
I've been on Skyrider at Canada's Wonderland and Shockwave, which used to be
at King's Dominion.
Both of those coasters have been removed, but they're interesting. Those are 2 across trains rather than the B&M stand-up is 4 across. The seats are a little bit, they're similar, whereas like you're sitting on this like little seat that comes in between
it looks like
your
a
legs.
bike seat kind of.
And then that has like over-the-shoulder restraints, but instead of like coming down from above, it comes from the side.
From the sides,
so it's almost like putting on a jacket. Like
Yeah.
you're putting these restraints on. They're interesting coasters. I mean, they're not comfortable at all, but they're interesting. I appreciate the history of the stand-up coaster, but in theory, it was a good idea. But it's not a coaster that stands the test of time as far as rideability.
Yeah,
you know,
that was a good pun. Should have thought of that at the beginning of our podcast. I think the obviously it's a really outdated model at this point. It was it was very 90s. It was very much a cool thing when the coaster wars were going on. It was like who could make the coolest, weirdest, whatever.
Well, it's like with the invert, then you had the stand-up, and then you had the flying coaster.
Yeah. It just kind of was lumped in with all those different revolutionary types.
Yeah.
But, ultimately, I acknowledge that Mantis wasn't a great coaster. As much of a fan as I am, if you've listened to the podcast, it's more of a nostalgic thing for me. But all that said, I will definitely say, having ridden pretty much all the other standing coasters left in the U.S. I rode Vortex at Carowinds.
Yep.
Didn't hate it. People think that it's awful. I did not. I didn't love it. I didn't rewrite it, but I sure didn't hate it.
Now, the one at Great Adventure or Great American California that's now Patriot, that used to be called Vortex also?
Yes. Yep.
Is that a clone?
I believe so. Mirror image, maybe?
Yeah, okay.
Or something like that?
Yeah. And we'll get into that, too, because some of these have been converted to floorless.
Which is really cool and really wise to preserve these coasters' lives.
Yeah, but I didn't mind Vortex. I mean, that's another one that I didn't mind so much because it's shorter, slower, not as many inversions, which
is the key for these stand-up coasters, is you want them to be not something with quick and whippy transitions, which is what really, I think, caused Mantis, I'm trying to think of some other ones, like maybe Iron Wolf or Apocalypse to get a conversion because they just were a little too much. Vortex isn't terrible. Georgia Scorcher's very similar in that it's small and compact. We rode that last year.
Yeah, I think it's a good layout.
Yeah, it's a great layout.
Yeah, I don't think it can get much better than Georgia Scorcher, or even on the opposite end with not Green Lantern, the Riddler. I mean, it's the biggest, tallest, fastest, most inversions, but it's so large that the inversions are more spaced out. They're kind of bigger, more exaggerated. You don't feel like you're like getting whipped through everything necessarily. So.
No, it's very gradual. Yeah. It looks intimidating from the outside, but when you're actually on it, I remember while I was on it, I was thinking, man, I really hope they don't end up converting this because it's just fun as it is.
I don't think they will.
It's great. Yeah. Which leads us to that point of conversion. Like we're seeing more of these coasters get converted into floorless coasters.
Yeah, Mantis being the first, right?
Yes, yes. So Mantis was the first with Rougarou.
Mm-hmm.
And Rougarou's, I mean, we've had some great rides on it.
Yeah.
But in general, it's okay. It's just nothing special.
So. I still like it.
But the conversion factor, I mean, we got to go back to the 80s, because this is when we first started seeing stand-up coasters get converted, but it was to the opposite end, to where people were making sit-down coasters stand-up coasters.
Yeah.
So starting with Momonga Standing Loop Coaster.
Right.
Extremeroller and Extremeroller at Worlds of Fun was an aero corkscrew.
Yeah.
And that just, I cannot imagine on an aero corkscrew having to stand up.
No.
That would be
that's
miserable.
Well, it only lasted a year, it looks like.
Yeah, just a year.
To 84. Oh, man, that sounds like a nightmare.
Terrible. I mean, just horrible. And then the same thing with Railblazer at Six Flags St. Louis, and that was just an aero mine train.
Yeah.
That they had stand up. So there's no inversions or anything. You're just standing up on a mine train
That's
coaster.
so weird, yeah.
Like, that was only 1 year too. So I think Aero at that point was like, oh, well, there's this new trend of stand-up coasters. Let's see what we can do by converting our existing coasters. But ultimately, as with anything with Aero, it was a big swing and a miss. So
yeah, and I'm surprised, the floorless conversions is it seems like, well, I guess there's only been 2 that I can think of, with Rougarou and then Vortex at California's Great America is now Patriot. It seemed like it was going to be the next kind of popular thing to do to like bring new life into these stand-up coasters, but it seemed like they just kind of stopped doing it. And I don't know, it was a couple years before COVID when Patriot was revamped, but I don't know the reason why they stopped doing it, because it seems like it's been a successful thing. Like, I mean, Rougarou, when you go to the park, it still doesn't have a long line.
No.
Same as Mantis, but it did for the first couple years. I think it kind of brought new life to the coaster where people wanted to check it out again, but I don't know. I don't know if there's any other coasters, Six Flags or Cedar Fair, that have this like in the plans to I've turned them into floorless.
I've wondered
because it was rumored, I think, for a little bit that Vortex at Carowinds was going to get the floorless treatment, but it just hasn't happened.
Yeah, and part of that, I wonder if it was COVID that just kind of pushed things back.
That's what I'm wondering too.
Because the most recent one I rode that was converted was Firebird at Six Flags
America.
America.
Another one. Yeah, yep, I forgot about that one.
And I mean, I wasn't blown away by it. I don't think you were either, right?
No, it's fine.
So, I mean, as you were saying, like when you rode Iron Wolf, that was probably your favorite.
Yeah.
So, the floorless conversion, basically what I've gathered is that it doesn't really enhance or take away from the experience as opposed to if it was a stand-up coaster, in my mind. And I get the idea is to make it more comfortable, maybe to enhance the experience of riding it, but ultimately, like Rougarou, Firebird, Patriot, I've ridden all 3, and they're just, like, okay. Like, I don't think it really made the coaster that much better or anything like that, more comfortable.
I do think it's an improvement, personally, because Mantis was something, like, over the last few years of its life, when I'd go to the park, it was just something I didn't ride anymore.
Yeah, it was so uncomfortable.
Because it was uncomfortable, and I'd been on it so much. So, but now that it's Rougarou and it's a floorless coaster, it is something that I seek out to ride, and I actually like it. And we had a really fun ride on it a couple of years ago. And, and same with Firebird. I do like it better than Iron Wolf, not by a lot, but it's a little bit better. I honestly think the biggest reason parks were doing the floorless conversion because it is kind of a cheap way to fool the general public into thinking they had a new coaster.
A new coaster,
so
exactly,
you paint the coaster, you give it a new name, it has new trains, rethemed, and then, for a few $1 million, you have a, quote, new coaster.
Yep, exactly. And it's all about giving new life and, again, selling it to the GP as this new thing. So,
because I do even remember, like, some GP people thinking like, oh man, Mantis is gone and they built this brand new coaster,
right?
Not realizing it's the same coaster.
And Cedar Point did not really. I mean, obviously news outlets were like, oh, they're converting the coaster, but unless you sought those news articles out, So your point didn't really tell people that
No.
this was a converted coaster.
No, not at all.
They were just like, this is a new one.
They said their Mantis is being squashed or removed or whatever, and then Ruger is the new coaster for the next year. And it fooled a lot of people who don't really pay attention to this stuff, like us nerds.
Right, exactly. Meanwhile, we're like, wait a minute, this is a little fishy.
Yeah, but it seems like the perfect thing for like a Six Flags park to do, like parks that have a smaller budget. That want something new for their park, something to promote to get people to come to the park. Kind of inexpensive thing to do is to convert a stand-up coaster into a floorless.
Yep. It's amazing to me. I mean, on that note, just because Six Flags, it's like this would be the type of thing I am shocked that they have not done more than just Firebird. But Green Lantern, obviously, Great Adventure has. Not Medusa. Jeez, Bizarro.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
I have heard that. Actually, I remember reading about this a while ago, but that was going to get rethemed or repainted. But I don't know if new trains were in the mix. But I think it was going to be repainted. Actually, because they started repainting it with like some green and orange colors, I think.
Yeah, they did. Oh, yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah, so I haven't heard if it's getting a floorless conversion, but it's definitely getting a retheme, it seems like.
Yeah, it should. And I think that, I really enjoyed Bizarro. I think that that's a great fit for Great Adventure. But, I guess my original point is I really believe that Green Lantern would be much better served as a floorless coaster.
I do too.
It's so uncomfortable.
It is, yeah.
And that's actually a mirror image of Mantis, the layout.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just time to move it to a park that could use it within the chain.
Yeah.
Like for example, I think Darien Lake could desperately use something of that caliber. It would be perfect.
It'd be perfect, yeah, for them to get a recycled coaster.
Yes, anything, because that park is such a dump.
Yeah, it is.
It's so bad.
Yeah, I think that'd be great, and that seems like something Six Flags would do. Just like move a coaster and
give it a new name,
new theme, new paint, and it's brand new to the people in the area.
Exactly, which is the key.
Yeah. I mean, they don't need to know that it's a recycled coaster that the other park didn't want anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So, Great Adventure, they're pretty well stacked with their coaster lineup anyway. So I think sacrificing Green Lantern to a park that could desperately use it and retheming it and redoing it would be great.
Now, and so like I said earlier in the podcast, Georgia Scorcher was the last ground-up stand-up coaster by B&M built, and that was in 99.
Yep.
And I assumed, okay, this is going to be the last stand-up coaster ever built. It was just a fad in the 90s. That's all it's going to be, and eventually all these are going to be removed. But over the past year, there's been leaks of new blueprints for a new, I think, stand-up model called the Surf Coaster from B&M.
There's not a whole lot of information out there. Yeah. There are some blueprints that have been uncovered.
Yeah, and they did file for a patent for a new restraint system, I think.
Yes. Yeah. From what I can gather, it looks like a stand-up model. Perhaps the bike seat, I guess, alternative looks a little bit more comfortable.
Well, and I think one of the major differences with this is the seats are on hydraulics.
Yes.
So that they
move with the coaster.
Which I think is brilliant.
Very brilliant. And
because I think that was one of the problems with the B&M stand-up coasters is you were just once you were locked in, there was no moving, and it just put so much pressure on your legs. Or if you were standing in the wrong position, if you were a guy, your nuts were done for. It was just bad. And I think this just kind of has evolved. Yeah, it's like it's having shocks on your seat basically to make the ride smoother,
which is great.
I'm very curious to try it. And SeaWorld in Orlando has been rumored to have the first surf model coaster. Yeah, I think COVID had pushed it back because I think it was supposed to be opening this year, summer 2023. But and I'm curious just size-wise what this if they'll be as big as the stand-up coasters of the past, or whatever. The thing that I'm a little concerned about, just because I'm not a fan in general, is the vest restraints. Yes, because based on what we've seen, it looks like vest restraints are going to be involved. I'm assuming that's what they would be using. Yeah, I don't like them as much. I don't either, and I'm afraid they just would kind of not be very comfortable for that type of ride. Yeah. But I don't know. I mean, we've never had a stand-up coaster with vest restraints, so maybe they're, really great. I just am a little skeptical, I guess. Yeah. I prefer the hard over-the-shoulder restraints, and even those aren't great, but I wish they could kind of figure something else out.
Yeah.
But the vest restraints, the same ones you find on the dive coasters or the
wing coasters.
The wing coasters or Banshee at Kings Island.
See, I don't think they work very well for Banshee. That's a hot take, but
I don't think so either.
There's certain models that they just don't work on.
Yeah, I agree. I prefer for those coasters, I'd rather have the hard over-the-shoulder restraint.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it'll be interesting to see. I'd be really curious to ride it, especially with that hydraulic system and the seat.
Mm-hmm.
But it's kind of cool that it's coming back because, like I said, in theory, it's a cool idea. But if they can kind of perfect the seating and improve on it, it could be something really fun. And with a surf coaster, maybe they don't need to have a bunch of inversions. Like, what if you had more of like a family-style stand-up coaster?
That would be fun.
That could be really fun.
Yeah.
And if it was launched, you could do some launch
Oh,
stuff.
yeah.
It'd be cool if like the seat, like you could move it sort of, like you could stand like sideways or
so there was like some surf emulation kind of
yeah.
I mean with if it's true it sounds like it is, but if it's true that it's SeaWorld Orlando that's getting the first one of these, I believe that's an indicator that it'll be a fairly small, possibly even family-sized coaster.
Yeah.
Because SeaWorld Orlando doesn't have a ton of room to work with.
No.
So it's not going to be anything like big and major like Riddler's Revenge or anything like that.
No. I expect it to be more on the scale of like Vortex or like Georgia Scorcher, even just kind of a smaller footprint.
I don't foresee it even having inversions or anything like that. I can't imagine.
No. Maybe one, maybe two, but nothing. I think they'll probably be a little bit more tame.
Yes.
But I'd be curious to ride it. And that was one of the fun things about the 90s during the Coaster Wars is like all these coaster manufacturers were coming up with these crazy new ideas like the invert coaster, the stand-up coaster, the flying coaster. We're not really getting as many of these like ideas. I guess the wing coaster.
That's fairly new. Dive coaster. Pretty new.
Yeah. I guess you could say the single rail coaster, but that's not really necessarily a different position of sitting. It's just you don't have someone next to you. But,
yeah.
So until the squat coaster comes out.
The squat coaster. Walter Bolliger and Claude Mabillard, they're scheming right now, I'm sure.
And I guess we do have the Axis coaster from S&S that we're still waiting for to come out, but that kind of looks like the next new kind of radical idea ride experience. Which is always cool, and they come up with the new ideas, new coaster ideas. So.
Yeah. So who knows what who knows what the future's going to hold for the stand-up coaster model? Obviously, the models of the '90s are dying off slowly.
Yeah, most of the TOGOs are gone.
They're gone or just in Japan.
Are there any? Yeah, they're in Japan. I don't think there's any left in the United States or Canada.
There's
right?
not. There's not. No.
Yeah, so most of them are in Japan. Like I know Skyrider that was at Canada's Wonderland. Has been moved to Japan, I believe.
So did Shockwave.
Shockwave, I think that was moved. King Cobra, whatever, at Kings Island.
I think that one was scrapped.
That might have been scrapped. Yeah, so I think eventually, like the B&M stand-up coasters that are left in America, like Vortex, Green Lantern, Georgia Scorcher, I don't know. I think eventually, if they're not converted to a floorless, that they're just going to kind of probably be removed.
Yeah.
Because I don't think they have the staying power the same as like an invert coaster.
No. And the thing is, we've only ever seen one in North America. I guess two technically. B&M's ever get scrapped ever.
Yeah.
And that was Dueling Dragons.
Right.
So I'm curious to see if like these parks realize, okay, it's time to either fish or cut bait with these stand-up coasters.
Yeah.
Where it's like, do we convert it? What do we do? It's time to move on. Maybe 10 years down the road.
Yeah.
I wonder if we'll see more B&Ms start to get scrapped as newer things come out, because B&M's kind of not on their way out, but you don't see them as much anymore.
Well, we're getting to the point where some of these early B&M coasters are, 30-some years old?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're getting to the point in the next decade where more B&Ms are going to be removed. Mm-hmm. Maybe not necessarily the hyper coasters and those sorts of things, but the stand-ups, the
inverts,
some
maybe.
Inverts, yeah. Like some of the Batman inverts, the early ones.
That's okay with me. Some of those Batman inverts are...
I'm fine with Six Flags Great America keeping theirs because it was the first invert, and they should keep it. But some of the other parks, remove it.
Yeah, over Georgia, Magic Mountain, see ya.
Yeah.
Get out.
And I could see them, in the next decade removing them just because, they're going to be 30-some years old or whatever.
And that's just it. This is just the evolution of coasters. People, 10 years ago, had you told people in the industry that, B&M was going to be, seeing some of their older coasters get scrapped, you'd think, what? That's crazy.
You wouldn't believe it,
but it's just the way it goes. I mean, you got companies like RMC, you got companies like Gerstlauer, all these companies that are putting out newer and even more revolutionary type things. It's just going to take the place of these older ones.
Yeah, and coasters just keep getting more and more comfortable and smoother, and so all these older coasters that don't have like that classic coaster status or like a huge fan base, like they're just going to be removed. Like all these B&M coasters that are walk-ons all summer, they're just going to have to be removed.
They will, exactly. And whether that means scrapped or if that means recycled within the chain or sold overseas, it's they're going to be gone before too long.
Eventually Rougarou is going to be gone. Is that going to be a sad day for you?
It will be.
Or have you already let go a little bit? Now that it's not Mantis?
Now that it's not Mantis, I've let go a little bit, but there's still like a little bit of life left in it.
Yeah,
for me, just because it's the same track and everything.
Every once in a while, you can see a spot on the track
where
the
it's like
paint's
purple.
rubbed off. You can see the Mantis below it.
Like I know if you're sitting on the block breaks before you get to the station, like it's like there's a small section of purple below you. It's like there it is.
That's when your heart starts beating a little faster.
It's still alive.
You get a little flush.
Yes.
You can't stand up right away.
No.
I guess you're already standing up.
Right.
Well, not anymore. I guess you're seated, but
but I get off and I'm a little weak in the knees.
You have to hold a book in front of your face. If you know what I'm saying.
Yes. Give it the old Texas tug.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
I thought it was the Texas belt buckle.
Same Texas belt buckle.
Guys know what we're talking about.
Yeah. The females, we're sorry. We're very sorry. Look it up.
There's no females listening to this.
No, who are we kidding?
Young kids, look it up. Well, maybe not.
Maybe don't.
Ask your parents.
Yeah, ask your parents.
Ask your dad. So that's the stand-up coaster.
Yeah.
Love it or hate it. It was a revolutionary idea. It's cool, and you have to admit, the first time you rode a stand-up coaster, you were excited.
Yes, even if you passed out while you were on it,
or your nuts were crushed,
or your knees completely gave up, and the blood flow to your brain also gave up. You still were
you were excited to ride it.
Yes, and you got on, and you were geeked.
Yeah.
And when they told you to lock your knees, you got a little nervous. You got a little nervous because you knew what was going to happen.
Yeah.
But you still had fun.
I'll say, too, before we wrap this up, they tell you, everyone had the different theories of what was the most comfortable way to ride the stand-up coaster.
Oh, gosh.
Like, either, locking your knees completely, keeping them a little bent. Some people I even saw, completely, lifted their legs up and rode it.
Oh.
Nothing. I mean, everything had its benefits and flaws. I would say, kind of having a little bit of a bent knee was the best for me.
It just depends on your height.
Yes.
It was that's what made it such a finicky coaster because some people that were shorter, locking the knees was best or whatever. But I think in general, bending the knees a little bit that kind of made sure you had a more comfortable ride.
That was your ticket.
Yep.
So, anyways, you guys can find us at airtimemisfits.com. We got some stuff for sale on there. We did have a stand-up coaster collection of candles. I think they're
sold out.
They're gone.
They're gone.
So you missed out. So I don't even know I'm mentioning it.
Make you all jealous that you missed out on it.
But check out some of the other stuff on there. You can also find us on Twitter and Instagram at Airtime Misfits. Thanks for listening. We'll see you in the next episode.
Peace.